Hello, and welcome to episode 30 of Sir Astro's Marvel Crisis Protocol painting series. In this video I'll be painting Iron Man from the Marvel Crisis Protocol Earth's Mightiest Core Set by Atomic Mass Games. For this beautiful Iron Man sculpt I've chosen to capture the look of the Model 42 armour from the comics, which is predominantly black with accents of gold and numerous Repulsor Tech cores glowing red, creating quite a striking overall look. I'll therefore be sharing quite a detailed look at my approach to painting the non-metallic metal black and gold, and hopefully take some of the fear out of the technique, which, although time-consuming, can be so incredibly rewarding. Let's begin. My initial plan is to provide a fairly bright base mid-tone for the golden areas using yellow ochre, and for the black areas I'm using black mixed with a little cobalt violet grey, just to add a gentle purple tint to subtly complement the gold. I'm starting with the legs to check that I'm happy with my colour choices, and I'm first painting all of the sections I'd like to be gold. I often like to start with quite a dark base tone when working in the non-metallic metal style, but on this occasion I thought it would be easier to start with something brighter to ensure I achieve a nice crisp border against the surrounding areas of black. It also means I'll have fewer layers of highlights to add. To achieve the necessary tonal range, I'll simply add some patches of shadow on top in a while. For these panels on the legs, I'm going to create the illusion of some additional joins in the armour where the gold and black sections meet. A couple of layers here will give us a nice solid tone. Before painting the black, I'm now using pure white to colour the various glowing elements. Although they're not really sculpted onto the model, I'm also adding some lights to the sides here. And I'm now mixing some cobalt violet grey into the black, and using this to paint all of the black sections of armour. I like to tidy up as I go along. Next I'm going to begin highlighting the black armour by mixing in some white to gradually bring up the values, along with some additional purple to maintain some colour interest. Quite often, I'll simply enhance the natural highlights caused by the light hitting the model, such as you might notice here on the back of the lower leg, which are basically zenithal type highlights. At other times, I'm simply looking for ways to break up the surfaces with some attractive looking shapes. I often like to vary the size and intensity of the highlights for any given area, such as you can see here on the side of the leg, where I'm placing quite a strong primary highlight towards the upper part of what is basically a cylinder, followed by a smaller secondary highlight further down. I'm now gradually bringing up the values, and it's up to you how many stages of highlight you want to work through, and indeed just how blended a look you might be after. Sketchy, stippled, smooth or textured, it's all down to the painting style of the individual. Here, a simple bit of black lining with highlights either side should be enough to sell the illusion of these being separate sections of armour. Even in the more shadowed areas, we want to create some interest. It's important to pace the way we build up the levels when painting black to avoid things becoming too grey. So we want most of the surface to sit in the darker region of the gradient, with the highlights ramping up into tightly focused areas. I'm also pushing up the values for areas where I feel light would hit from the nearby repulsor tech cores. We can then jump up to some pretty bright specular highlights, which we can use to add a bit of sparkle, mostly to some of the more upturned edges and corners. It's important, however, not to push every single highlight to the max, but to choose selectively where we want to draw the eye and maintain a pleasing overall balance. I'm now moving on to the areas of gold where I'll be using some Gobi Brown and some black to create some shadows, but we'll first build up the highlights using Naples Yellow, then Vanilla White. So here I'm adding some Naples Yellow to the yellow ochre base tone and using this to place my main areas of highlight, and I'm initially going to focus on the left leg. I'm now building up to pure Naples Yellow. There's just enough room here for one or two main highlights running in the direction of the cylinder, and I also want to pick out the edges. I'm now mixing increasing amounts of Vanilla White into the Naples Yellow for the brighter highlights. There isn't much room to manoeuvre here, so a gentle bit of stippling will do. I'm now going to darken one or two areas of shadow using the Gobi Brown. I'm continuing to push the highlights up to pure Vanilla White. And finally, I'm adding some black to the Gobi Brown to go darker still for the shadows. You can see I really want to maximise the contrast here along this join, and I ended up redrawing the black line to tidy the edge. I'm now working round the rest of the gold areas in the same way. The last main colour to apply is the red for the lights. For that I'm using a mix of dark red and red-orange pigments by Hera Models, but any bright or fluorescent red would be fine for this. I'm mixing in some ultra matte varnish because I quite like the resulting consistency, but you could use whatever medium, including water, you like. I'm looking for a reasonably thinned consistency here, and ultimately would like the centre of each light to be pretty white. We can also place some object source lighting to some of the surrounding areas whilst we do this. I then mixed in some white to brighten up the centre of each light. I actually ended up using pure white. I'll be doing some further refining here in a while, but I'm pretty happy with the overall look, so I'm now going to paint the rest of the armour in the same way. Here you can see the areas I've chosen to paint gold for the upper half of the body. This includes some thin arrow-like panels that run up each side of the torso. It's okay if these are fairly rough to begin with, as we've yet to paint the surrounding areas of black. I'm also adding a strip of gold towards the top of each forearm. And of course there's the front part of the helmet. I'm now painting the black, followed with some white for the lights. Here I'm once again adding some lights that aren't actually sculpted on the model, one to each shoulder. I'm now providing the highlights and will be freely jumping between the different colours and sections of the armour. With large flat areas like the chest here, I like to play freely with some organic looking reflections, taking care to avoid any symmetry and also ensuring that the edges are quite well defined. Once again, I really want to create the illusion that these are separate sections of armour. For the flat parts of the chest, we can thin the paint a little further to help create some smoother gradations. I ended up also adding some vanilla white to the brightest highlights for the areas of black. And here I'm brightening up the little edges surrounding some of the lights. I confess I probably spent a little less time on the back than I did on the front. Here I decided to mix some violet into the black to create a richer shadow tone, which I'm brushing quite thinly into some of the more prominent areas of shadow. I'm starting to like the way this is coming together now. Here I'm once again preparing for some object source lighting. And I'm now applying the red to the lights, followed with some brightening up of the centre of each. White ink is quite good for this kind of thing. After providing some preliminary colour to the base, I'm now going to paint the blast effect, starting with a fresh undercoat of pure white. For the top part of the blast, I've decided to mix a pale blue using sky blue and white. And for the lower part, I'm using Sol Yellow, also mixed with white. For the base of the blast, I'm using a more saturated mix with a greater amount of the Sol Yellow. And here I'm mixing in some of the red-orange, which can be loosely blended in with the yellow. I don't want the blast to draw too much attention away from the figure, so I've decided to paint all of the outer parts with a dark grey. I'm mainly using Graphene Gray for this, with some black mixed in for the more shadowed underside, and some graphite added in for the highlights. I find adding little fragments like this helps add to the explosive look. I'm now just adding a few highlights. And here I chose to brush some thinned dark red roughly over the border where the orange meets the grey. After doing a little further lightening and refining of the base, I'm now adding some pieces of litter, and you can find a link to a printable sheet of these in the video description. These can be folded and twisted to create some dynamic shapes, and glued down using Mod Podge or PVA glue. I'm also adding quite a bit of rubble using Urban Scatter by Jarvis. Little pieces of this can look quite effective when placed at the ends of the blast. I'm now returning to add some final highlights and refinements to the armour. This includes trimming back some of the spread of the object source lighting, whilst also adding 1 or 2 touches of red light to some of these reflective surfaces. For what it's worth, I also chose to lighten the underside of the feet with a cool grey. And here I'm making some final adjustments to the chest area. And this completes Iron Man. Thank you for joining me. I very much hope you've enjoyed the episode. As usual, you can find full paint and product lists in the video description, along with links to all of the places I can be found on social media and on Spotify. As always, my sincerest thanks go to my amazing patrons for funding this work and helping me to keep going. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from Marvel Crisis Protocol. Happy painting!